The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers as I heard Laura's heels clicking across the garage floor. 45 years old, and I still jumped like a guilty teenager when my wife appeared unannounced. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan, we need to talk. Her voice carried that particular edge I'd learned to recognize over 17 years of marriage. The same tone she used when discussing overdue bills or my drinking. I wiped my hands on an oil-stained rag, not bothering to look up from the Mustang's engine. Can it wait, Mrs. Henderson needs this baby running by tomorrow. No, it can't wait. Laura stepped closer, her expensive perfume mixing with the smell of motor oil and rust. Something was different about her lately. New clothes, new attitude, new everything. My brother called. He's coming to stay with us for a while. My hands stilled on the carburetor. Which brother? Derek. Nuh. The wrench clattered to the concrete floor. Derek Ashford, Laura's golden boy brother, who'd never worked an honest day in his life. The same Derek who'd borrowed $3,000 from us 2 years ago and never paid it back. The same Derek who looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. How long is a while? I asked, finally meeting her eyes. Laura's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her purse. He's having some financial difficulties. His startup failed, and he needs time to get back on his feet. Financial difficulties. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean he blew through another trust fund and needs somewhere to crash while he figures out his next get-rich-quick scheme? Don't be like that, Ethan. He's family. He's a parasite. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was tired of pretending. And the last time he stayed here, my tools went missing. Funny how that happened right before he suddenly had money for that trip to Vegas. Mias. Laura's face flushed red. You never proved he took anything. I didn't need to prove it. I knew. I picked up the wrench, testing its weight in my palm. But fine. He can stay in the basement. 1 month, Laura. That's it. Actually, I was thinking he could use the spare bedroom upstairs. The basement is so cramped, and the basement or the street. His choice. For a moment, we stared at each other across the gulf that had been widening between us for months. Laura broke first, nodding curtly before turning on her heel. He'll be here Friday, she called over her shoulder. I watched her walk away, noting how her hips swayed differently now, how she held herself like a woman with secrets. The burner phone I'd seen her hiding last week suddenly made more sense. So did the late-night work calls, and the new life insurance policy she'd insisted we both sign. Derek's arrival wasn't random. Nothing Laura did was random anymore. I turned back to the Mustang, but my mind was racing. In my previous life, before I became just another grease monkey in a dying Maine town, I'd been good at reading people. Staying alive in Afghanistan had depended on it. Those instincts were rusty now, dulled by years of domestic routine, but they weren't dead. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Looking forward to seeing you again, brother-in-law. Hope you're ready for some changes around there. Derek. The cocky bastard was already marking his territory. I deleted the message and went back to work. But something cold had settled in my chest. Laura thought she was playing chess while I played checkers. She had no idea what kind of man she'd married. Time to remind her. Derek showed up 3 days early, naturally. I was under the hood of a '78 Camaro when his rented BMW pulled into our driveway with a bass-heavy thump of expensive speakers. Through the garage window, I watched him unfold himself from the driver's seat like he was posing for a magazine cover. At 34, Derek Ashford still looked like the college quarterback he'd once been. Perfectly styled hair, designer jeans, and a smile that had charmed his way out of more trouble than I could count. He surveyed our modest colonial house with barely concealed disgust before grabbing a single leather duffel bag from the back seat. One bag for a man who supposedly needed months to get back on his feet. Ethan! His voice boomed across the yard as he spotted me. Looking good, brother. Still playing with cars, I see. I wiped my hands slowly, taking my time. Derek, you're early. You know me, always eager to see family. He clapped me on the shoulder with enough force to stagger a smaller man. Where's my beautiful sister? Shopping. She'll be back soon. I gestured toward the house. Basement's through the kitchen. You remember where that is? His smile faltered slightly. Actually, Laura mentioned I'd be staying upstairs. The master bedroom has such a nice view of the lake. The master bedroom is where Laura and I sleep. You get the basement or you get gone. For just a moment, Derek's mask slipped. I caught a glimpse of something ugly underneath, the real Derek that most people never saw. Then the charm was back, cranked up to 11. Hey, no problem. Basement's perfect. More privacy down there anyway. He winked. Might be bringing some lady friends around, if you know what I mean. I knew exactly what he meant, and I knew Laura wouldn't be shopping much longer. Derek grabbed his bag and headed for the house, but stopped at the front door. Oh, by the way, I might need to borrow your truck sometimes. The BMW's a rental, and I can't afford to keep it much longer. No, come on, man, just occasionally. I've got some job interviews lined up, and I said no. I stepped closer, close enough to smell his expensive cologne. My truck, my tools, my house, all off limits. You want transportation? Call an Uber. Derek's jaw tightened. Laura said you'd be more cooperative. Laura says a lot of things. We stared at each other for a long moment. Derek was bigger, younger, and probably thought he could take me in a fight. He was wrong, but I wasn't ready to show that card yet. Well, he said finally, this should be an interesting month. Yeah, it should be. He disappeared into the house, and I went back to work. But I was listening now, paying attention to sounds I'd been ignoring for weeks. The creak of floorboards overhead, the murmur of voices, the particular laugh Laura saved for people she wanted to impress. 20 minutes later, she was back, arms full of shopping bags from stores we couldn't afford. She barely glanced at me as she hurried inside, but I caught the extra sway in her walk, the fresh lipstick, the way she'd arranged her hair. My phone buzzed. Text from Laura. Making Derek's favorite dinner tonight. Might run late. I looked at the timestamp. She'd sent it 5 minutes before pulling into the driveway. The pieces were falling into place now. Derek's early arrival, Laura's sudden shopping trip, the coordinated timing. They'd been planning this. The question was how long it had been going on and what exactly they were planning. I thought about the life insurance policy again. $500,000, with a double indemnity clause for accidental death. Laura had been very specific about that part. My old commanding officer used to say that the enemy's greatest weapon was underestimation. Let them think you're weak, stupid, or broken, and they'll make mistakes. Fatal mistakes. I smiled and went back to work on the Camaro. Let them play their games. I'd been playing longer and better than either of them realized. From inside the house came the sound of laughter, Derek's booming guffaw, and Laura's delighted giggle. They sounded like conspirators sharing a private joke. Soon, I'd be in on the joke too. The Last Chance bar hadn't changed in the 15 years I'd been drinking there. Same sticky floors, same neon beer signs, same crowd of blue-collar regulars nursing their problems one bottle at a time. It was my refuge, the one place where Derek's poison hadn't spread, or so I thought. Ethan! Big Mike waved me over to the bar, his massive frame barely contained by the wooden stool. Mike Torino had been my squad leader in Afghanistan, and now he ran the best dive bar in 3 counties. If anyone would understand what I was dealing with, it was Mike. Usual? He asked, already reaching for the Jack Daniels. Make it a double. Mike poured the whiskey and slid it across the scarred wooden bar. Rough day? Rough week. Derek's back. Ah, shit. Mike's face darkened. Laura's brother? The one who stole my tools and hit on every woman in town last time he was here. Yeah, that Derek. How long this time? Indefinitely, according to Laura. His latest business venture went belly up. I downed half the whiskey in one swallow. He's staying in our basement, driving my wife around town, and generally making my life miserable. Mike nodded sympathetically. Family's complicated, man, but you've dealt with worse. Have I? The question came out more bitter than I intended. At least in Afghanistan, I knew who the enemy was. Hey, Ethan! I turned to see Tommy Brennan approaching, beer in hand and a grin on his face. Tommy had been my friend since high school. We'd worked on cars together, double dated, been each other's best man. If anyone had my back, it was Tommy. Tommy, how's the garage treating you? His grin faltered slightly. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I've been thinking of making some changes. Something cold settled in my stomach. What kind of changes? Well, Derek stopped by yesterday. Had some interesting ideas about expanding the business, maybe bringing in some outside investment. The whiskey turned to acid in my throat. Derek doesn't know anything about running a garage. Maybe not, but he knows about business, marketing, customer relations, that sort of thing. Tommy wouldn't meet my eyes. He thinks we could really grow the operation if we modernized a bit. Well, I've been thinking about going independent for a while. Derek offered to back me if I wanted to start my own place. I stared at my oldest friend, seeing a stranger. With what money? Derek's broke. He's got investors lined up. Says there's real potential in this market if you know how to tap it. Tommy's voice carried a defensive edge now. Not everyone wants to stay small time forever, Ethan. Small time. I repeated the words slowly. Is that what I am, Tommy? Come on, man. You know I didn't mean it like that. But he had meant it exactly like that. Derek had been in town less than a week, and already he was turning my friends against me, filling their heads with dreams of easy money and bigger opportunities. What about our partnership? I asked. The plans we made. Tommy shifted uncomfortably. Those were just ideas, Ethan. Nothing set in stone. Right, nothing set in stone. I finished my whiskey and stood up. Good luck with your new business partner, Tommy. Hope Derek's promises work out better for you than they did for his last investors. I started to leave, but Tommy grabbed my arm. Don't be like this, man. It's not personal. It's not personal. I shook off his grip. You're taking money from my wife's brother to compete against me. And it's not personal? Your wife's brother who's trying to help us all succeed. Maybe if you weren't so stubborn about change, maybe if you weren't so eager to believe every line of bullshit Derek feeds you. I looked around the bar, noticing how conversations had stopped, how people were watching us. Tell me, Tommy, what else has Derek been saying about me? Tommy's face reddened. Nothing, man, just business stuff. Bullshit. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. What did he tell you? Just, look, he's concerned about Laura. Says you've been different lately, angry, paranoid, drinking too much. The room seemed to tilt around me. Paranoid about what? I don't know, man. He just thinks maybe you need help. Professional help. Professional help. The kind that would make a man's accidental death seem more plausible. The kind that would explain why a paranoid, alcoholic mechanic might have a fatal accident with his own equipment. I looked at Mike, hoping for support, but even he seemed uncertain now. Derek's poison was spreading faster than I'd realized. You know what, Tommy? You're right. I do need help. I pulled out my wallet and threw a 20 on the bar. I need help figuring out when my oldest friend turned into a backstabbing piece of shit. The silence that followed was deafening. Tommy's face went white, then red, then white again. Fuck you, Ethan, he said finally. Derek was right about you. Yeah? What else was Derek right about? But Tommy was already walking away, and I could see other faces turning away from me. Conversations resuming in hushed tones. The damage was done. I walked out of the last chance, knowing I might never be welcome there again. Derek had been busy while I was working, spreading his version of events, positioning himself as the reasonable one trying to help his troubled brother-in-law. It was a masterful play. Isolate the target, turn his friends against him, make him seem unstable and dangerous. Then, when the accident happened, everyone would nod sadly and say they saw it coming. But Derek had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what kind of man he was dealing with. I'd lost friends before. Good men who died because someone else made the wrong call. The difference was, this time I knew who the enemy was. And this time, I was going to be ready. The confrontation came sooner than expected. I was closing up the garage Thursday evening when I heard multiple car doors slamming in the parking lot. Through the window, I saw Tommy's truck, along with two other vehicles I recognized. Cars belonging to guys from our old crowd. They'd come in force. The garage door was still open, so they walked right in like they owned the place. Tommy led the pack, flanked by Danny Morrison and Steve Walsh. Behind them came the real surprise, Derek, wearing a concerned expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ethan, Tommy said, his voice carefully neutral. We need to talk. Humping. I wiped my hands on a rag, buying time to assess the situation. 4 against 1, but I had the home field advantage. More importantly, I had 20 years of experience these boys couldn't imagine. Talk about what? About what happened at the bar the other night, Derek said, stepping forward. Tommy told me there was some kind of misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. Tommy made his position pretty clear. Look, man, Danny chimed in. We've all been friends for years. No reason we can't work this out like adults. Adults, I repeated the word slowly. Is that what we're calling it when you gang up on someone in their own place of business? Nobody's ganging up on anybody, Steve said, but his hand rested on the wrench hanging from his belt. We're just concerned. Concerned about what? Derek moved closer, his face a mask of brotherly concern. About you, Ethan. Laura's worried sick. She says you've been acting strange lately, paranoid, aggressive. Laura says a lot of things. She says you accused her of cheating, Tommy said, that you've been following her around town. making wild accusations. I hadn't accused Laura of anything, yet. But Derek was building his narrative, laying the groundwork for what came next. She also says you've been drinking heavily, Derek continued. Coming home at all hours, muttering about conspiracies and people being out to get you. People are out to get me, I said quietly. Present company included. The four men exchanged glances. Danny and Steve looked uncomfortable, but Tommy's face was set in hard lines. Derek just looked satisfied. See what I mean? Derek said to the others. This is exactly what Laura was talking about. You son of a bitch, I said, taking a step toward him. You think you're pretty clever, don't you? Derek held up his hands in a peacekeeping gesture. Ethan, I know you're upset, but I'm not upset. I'm impressed, I smiled, and something in my expression made Danny take a step backward. You've been in town less than 2 weeks, and you've already turned my friends against me, convinced my wife I'm crazy, and positioned yourself as the reasonable voice of concern. That's not what, it's textbook manipulation. Isolate the target, control the narrative, make everyone else complicit in your plan. I looked at Tommy, Danny, and Steve. The question is, do you idiots realize you're being played? The only one playing games here is you, Tommy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Then explain this. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photos I'd taken over the past week. Derek's BMW, parked outside the Riverside Motel last Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. I showed them the screen. Derek's face went pale. So what? Steve said. Maybe he was meeting someone about a job. Maybe. I swiped to the next photo. Laura's car, same motel, same day, parked 3 spaces away. The silence stretched out like a taut wire. Danny and Steve looked confused, but Tommy was starting to understand. That doesn't prove anything, Derek said, but his voice was tight now. You're right, it doesn't. I swiped again. But this might. The next photo showed Derek and Laura coming out of a motel room together. Laura's hair was mussed, her blouse wrinkled. Derek's arm was around her waist, his hand resting possessively on her hip. Jesus Christ, Danny whispered. Your sister Derek? I looked at him with mock concern. That's some pretty close family bonding you've got going there. Derek's mask finally slipped completely. You sick fuck. You followed us? I followed my wife. You just happened to be attached to her like a parasite. Tommy was staring at the phone screen like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Ethan, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. That was the point. I pocketed the phone. Derek needed you all to think I was the problem. Paranoid, jealous, unstable. That way, when I had my unfortunate accident, nobody would ask too many questions. Accident? Steve's voice cracked slightly. You didn't think this was just about money, did you? Derek and Laura have been planning this for months. The life insurance policy, the campaign to make me look crazy, the systematic destruction of my relationships. It's all been leading up to one thing. Derek was backing toward the door now, but Tommy blocked his path. Is it true? Tommy demanded. Were you planning to hurt Ethan? This is insane, Derek said. You're all listening to a paranoid drunk? Answer the question, Danny said, his voice hard now. Derek looked around the garage like a trapped animal. You don't understand. Laura's miserable with him. He's holding her back, keeping her from the life she deserves. So you decided to kill him? Steve's hand was on his wrench now, but for a different reason. It wouldn't have been like that. Just an accident. Something quick and clean. Laura would get the insurance money, we'd wait a decent interval, then Tommy hit him. It wasn't a particularly hard punch, but Derek wasn't expecting it. He went down hard, his head bouncing off the concrete floor. For a moment, nobody moved. Shit, Danny said. Is he? Derek groaned and tried to sit up, blood trickling from his nose. You broke my fucking nose. Should have broken your fucking neck, Tommy said, shaking his hand. Jesus, Ethan. I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. Forget it. You didn't know. But I should have. I've known you for 20 years, and I let this piece of shit convince me you were the problem. Derek struggled to his feet, one hand pressed to his bleeding nose. This isn't over, he said, glaring at me. Laura will never believe. Laura's going to have bigger problems than believing anything, I said. Like explaining to the police why she and her brother were planning to murder her husband for insurance money. You can't prove. I can prove enough. I pulled out my phone again. Smile, Derek. You've been on camera for the last 10 minutes. His face went white as he realized what had happened. The whole confrontation. including his confession, had been recorded. "You set this up," he whispered. "I learned from the best. You wanted to isolate me, turn my friends against me, make me look unstable. Mission accomplished. But you forgot one thing." "What's that?" I smiled, and this time there was nothing friendly about it. "I'm not the same man I was when you started this game, and now it's my turn to play." Derek looked around the garage at the faces surrounding him. Tommy, Danny, and Steve were all staring at him with undisguised disgust. "Get out," Tommy said quietly. "Get out before I finish what I started." Derek stumbled toward the door, then stopped and looked back at me. "This won't end here, Ethan. Laura and you are done," I said. "By tomorrow morning, half the town will know what kind of man you really are. The other half will know by noon." "You can't." "I can, and I will." "See, Derek, you made one crucial mistake. You thought this was about money, or even about Laura, but it's not." "Then what's it about?" "It's about the fact that you tried to destroy everything I've built here. My business, my friendships, my reputation. You were willing to burn it all down for your own gain." I stepped closer, close enough to smell the fear on him. "But most of all, it's about the fact that you underestimated me." Derek fled then, stumbling out into the night with blood still streaming from his nose. The sound of his rental car starting and speeding away echoed through the garage. Tommy, Danny, and Steve stood in awkward silence for a moment. "Ethan," Tommy said finally, "what can we do to help?" I looked at my oldest friend, seeing the shame and regret in his eyes. "Help me finish this." "What do you need?" I smiled, feeling something cold and predatory stirring in my chest. "I need you to spread the word about what Derek really is. I need everyone in town to know what he and Laura were planning." "Consider it done," Danny said grimly. "And then," I continued, "I need you to help me give them exactly what they deserve." The three men nodded, their faces set in hard lines. Derek had turned them against me, but in doing so, he'd also turned them against himself. Now they were ready to help me finish what he'd started. It was time for the final act. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when it involves sex, betrayal, and attempted murder. By Friday morning, Derek and Laura's affair was the hottest gossip in 3 counties. By afternoon, everyone knew about the insurance plot. I was working on a transmission when Detective Rachel Norris walked into my garage. Rachel and I had history. She'd been military police when I was special forces, and we'd worked together on a few operations that officially never happened. "Ethan," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "we need to talk." I wiped my hands and followed her outside, where her unmarked cruiser was parked next to my truck. "Derek Ashford filed a complaint against you last night," she said. "Claims you assaulted him and threatened to kill him." "Did he mention why?" "He says you're having some kind of breakdown. Paranoid delusions, violent outbursts, the whole package." Rachel's expression was unreadable. "He's also claiming you faked those photos somehow. What do you think?" Rachel studied my face for a long moment. "I think Derek Ashford is a lying piece of shit who's in way over his head. But I also think you need to be very careful about how you handle this." "Meaning?" "Meaning if Derek turns up dead or missing, you're going to be the prime suspect. And if Laura has an accident while this is all playing out, it's going to look very suspicious." I nodded. "What would you do?" "In my position? Officially, I'd advise you to let the law handle it. File for divorce, press charges for conspiracy. Let the system work." "And unofficially?" Rachel's smile was sharp as a blade. "Unofficially, I'd say that Derek and Laura made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences." She climbed back into her cruiser, then rolled down the window. "Just remember, Ethan, whatever you do, make sure it's legal. I'd hate to have to arrest an old friend. Wouldn't dream of putting you in that position." "Good." She started the engine. "Oh, and Ethan, that recording you made last night? You might want to make sure copies of it end up in the right hands, just in case something happens to the original." She drove away, leaving me with a lot to think about. Rachel was right. I had to be careful. But I also had to finish this. Derek and Laura had tried to destroy me, and they'd come closer to succeeding than I cared to admit. Now it was time to return the favor. I spent the rest of the day making preparations, phone calls to old contacts, arrangements with people who owed me favors, careful planning of what came next. Derek thought he was playing chess, but he'd never learned the most important rule of the game: always think 3 moves ahead. That evening, I came home to find Laura packing. She was throwing clothes into suitcases with the frantic energy of someone who knew the walls were closing in. "Going somewhere?" I asked from the doorway. She spun around, her face pale and drawn. "Ethan, I didn't hear you come in." "I can see that. Where's Derek?" He left town, this morning. Without saying goodbye? That's not very brotherly of him." Laura's hands shook as she folded a blouse. "This is all a misunderstanding, Ethan. If you'd just listen." "I'm listening. Derek and we're not—" "It's not what you think." "Really? Then what is it?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. We both knew there was no explanation that would make this better. "The insurance policy," I said quietly. "When were you planning to cash it in?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. $500,000. Double indemnity for accidental death. That's a lot of money, Laura. Enough to start a new life with Derek somewhere far away from here." "You're being paranoid again." "Am I? Then explain the motel receipts in your purse, or the burner phone you've been hiding, or the fact that you've been asking very specific questions about my work schedule." Laura sank onto the bed, her face crumpling. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen?" "You were supposed to be happy. We were going to wait until after you were gone. Then Derek and I would mourn appropriately, and eventually you'd console each other and live happily ever after on my life insurance money." She nodded miserably. "There's just one problem with that plan, Laura." "What?" I smiled, and she flinched at what she saw in my expression. "I'm not dead." The next morning, Derek's rental car was found abandoned at the bottom of Miller's Quarry. The car had gone through the guardrail sometime during the night, plunging 30 feet into the dark water below. There was no body. The state police dragged the quarry for 3 days before calling off the search. Derek Ashford was presumed dead, another victim of the treacherous mountain roads that claim several lives each year. Laura was devastated, of course. She threw herself into the role of grieving sister-in-law with the same enthusiasm she'd once brought to our marriage. The whole town watched as she sobbed at the memorial service, clutching a photo of Derek and speaking about what a wonderful man he'd been. It was quite a performance, but I knew better. And so did Detective Norris, who made a point of mentioning that Derek's body might never be found, given the depth and currents of the quarry. She also mentioned that the car's brakes had failed, though the cause of the failure remained unclear. "Funny thing about brake lines," she said conversationally. "They can corrode over time, especially on rental cars that don't get proper maintenance. Of course, they can also be cut, but that would leave very specific marks that a trained investigator would recognize." "Good thing you're trained," I said. "Very good thing. Makes it easy to tell the difference between an accident and something else." The investigation was closed within a week. Accidental death due to mechanical failure. Case closed. Laura played the widow for exactly 30 days. Then she announced she was leaving town to start fresh somewhere new. She'd inherited Derek's life insurance policy, she explained. A modest sum that would help her begin again. What she didn't mention was that Derek's policy had been taken out just 6 months earlier, with Laura as the sole beneficiary. Or that Derek had been very much alive when he'd called her from a payphone in Montreal to confirm the money had been transferred to their joint account. Derek wasn't dead. He was just gone, along with $50,000 from the insurance payout and whatever was left of his trust fund. Laura would join him eventually, once the heat died down and people stopped paying attention. It was actually a pretty good plan. They'd cut their losses, abandoned the scheme to kill me, and settled for a smaller but guaranteed payday. In a year or two, they'd surface somewhere warm and expensive, living off their ill-gotten gains and congratulating themselves on their cleverness. There was just one problem with their plan. I'd been 3 moves ahead from the beginning. Derek wasn't in Montreal. He was in a storage unit outside Bangor, very much alive but not in any condition to enjoy his freedom. The brake line failure had been real enough. I'd cut them myself, just enough to make the car dangerous but not immediately fatal. Derek had survived the crash into the quarry, just as I'd planned. What he hadn't survived was the conversation we'd had afterward. Laura left town on a Thursday, driving toward what she thought was a new life with Derek. She made it as far as the Massachusetts border before the state police pulled her over for a routine traffic stop. They found Derek's body in her trunk. The evidence was overwhelming. Derek had been beaten to death with a tire iron, the same tire iron found in Laura's car, covered with her fingerprints and Derek's blood. There were signs of a struggle, defensive wounds on both bodies, clear evidence that the siblings had turned on each other in a dispute over money. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Laura and Derek had conspired to kill me for insurance money. When that plan failed, they decided to fake Derek's death and split his insurance payout. But greed and paranoia had poisoned their partnership. Derek had tried to cut Laura out of the deal, so she'd killed him and tried to flee with all the money. It was a compelling narrative, supported by physical evidence, witness testimony, and Laura's own recorded conversations with Derek about their plans to murder me. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict her of first-degree murder. Laura got life without parole. She spent her remaining years in a maximum security prison, maintaining her innocence to anyone who would listen. She claimed Derek was alive, that someone had framed her, that the whole thing was an elaborate setup. Nobody believed her. After all, who could have orchestrated something so complex? Who would have had the skills, the connections, the sheer ruthless intelligence to manipulate two killers into destroying each other? Certainly not Ethan Cole, the small-town mechanic who'd been lucky to survive his wife's betrayal. I kept working at the garage, fixing cars and living quietly. People felt sorry for me. The poor bastard whose wife had tried to kill him, then murdered her own brother when their plan fell apart. I played the role of the traumatized survivor, grateful to be alive and trying to rebuild his shattered life. It was quite a performance. But sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd drive out to Miller's Quarry and look down into the dark water. Derek was down there somewhere, weighted down with chains and concrete, his body feeding the fish that nobody would ever catch. He'd wanted to play games with a simple mechanic. He'd learned too late that some mechanics know how to fix more than just engines. They know how to fix problems.